Hello, everybody, and welcome to our roundtable discussion on Europe's AI strategy, challenges and the way forward, organized by the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, ELIAMEP in Athens. So, about a month ago, the Trump administration allowed access to Anthropic's Claude Mythos 5 to a set of US organizations, and only after the US government's approval. So European leaders were alarmed and they engaged in diplomatic efforts which so far have not borne fruit. The US president has not relented. As we all know, Claude Mythos 5 can be used to find and exploit software vulnerabilities of IT systems in banks, hospitals, government, the lot. And Mythos can exploit those vulnerabilities a lot more effectively than humans. As Anthropic themselves have warned, these cyber security capabilities make it uniquely attractive to malicious actors planning cyber attacks. Not very reassuring. So I think up to that point, most people in Europe said, well, the US government will never cut Europe off. Now we have all realized that actually Europe may be facing an existential challenge. So lagging behind the US and China in AI may expose us not just to relative economic decline, something to which we have been used in the last, 80 years, growing less than other economies, but growing nevertheless and enjoying a high standard of living. Not that, but rather to a rather bleak future of absolute impoverishment, social strife, dependence, economic and security dependence, strategic vulnerability, and eventually, who knows, loss of sovereignty as a result of helplessness in the face of aggression, including military aggression. I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, but I would like to discuss with you how we should react to this, not certainty, but possibility, to this risk. Should we dismiss it and hope that it will go away, or should we take it seriously and prepare for it? Can we afford to join the AI race? And if not, can we afford to stay out of the AI race? And if we were to decide to join it, where should we start? So our roundtable discussion today brings together experts from policymaking, academia, industry, to explore what Europe needs to do at the national and EU level in order to prepare for the AI challenge and how. Our guests today are, in alphabetical order, Michalis Bletsas, who's research scientist and director of computing at MIT Media Lab, and also governor of the National Cybersecurity Authority here in Athens. Gosia Nikovska, who's head of the AI Innovation and Policy Coordination Unit, part of DG Connect at the European Commission in Brussels. Asad Ramzan-Ali, Director of AI and Technology Policy at the Vanderbilt Policy Accelerator in Washington, D.C., and Yorgos Verdi, who's Policy and Advocacy Lead at the Open Markets Institute Europe in Brussels, and by the way, the author of our recent European Economy Policy Brief on Europe's AI challenge here at ELIAMEP. I'm Manos Matsaganis, professor at Polytechnic University of Milan and head of the European Economy Program at ELIAMEP. So let me address the first question to all of our panelists, starting perhaps with Michalis Bletsas. So what was your reaction on hearing the news that fateful Friday, 12th June, that the US government had applied export controls to Mythos 5? I think you have to unmute yourself.
I wasn't very surprised because unfortunately, we're getting very used to unusual events and non-consistent action and totally crazy policy making coming out of the White House when it comes to AI. They are going from one extreme to the other. They are starting from saying, leave it alone, don't do anything. And then they are starting to limit, completely treating it as a very dangerous thing and saying that, people should not get access to it, etc., etc. Now, mythos is mostly a marketing move. If you look at what ISLE did in the UK, the AI Security Study Institute did over there, every vulnerability that Mythos found, they were able to found with previous LLMs. What Mythos has done very well, it has a very nice harness around it that focuses it on cybersecurity and makes it easier to become productive in a cybersecurity context. The capability was there before. So we have to, those are two important attributes if we want to make informed and calm choices moving forward. The capability was there, the inconsistency and the erratic behavior was there before. And we are talking about a very powerful technology that is going to evolve. It evolves very rapidly, and we cannot afford to stay outside and just be passive watchers of it. But we have to also unfocus from the hype, and the hype right now is focused around LLMs. AI is much, much larger, bigger than LLMs. AI is a lot about math. At the end of the day, it's mostly about advanced math. And we have to figure out where our strengths lie, and we do have plenty of strengths.
I'm going to
and
ask
we
you
have to
about
focus on that. There is a lot of science that needs to happen when it comes to AI, and we have to focus on that. Focusing on the LLM race is probably very wrong, especially when we already have some capabilities in Europe. Maybe we should subsidize, maybe we'd support those capabilities a little bit more so that we can have some, open source models that are more focused on Europe and European needs and European languages, maybe. However, we have to keep in mind when it comes to progress in LLMs, the progress will come from more carefully curating what we feed them and much less about scaling them up. Actually, if we continue in that path, I think we will see degradation because more and more content in the internet is being created by them. And I think that we are moving towards degeneration.
Get back to you on that point, but let
Yeah.
me move to Assad, who I presume was in the US last month when this Claude Mythos and Fable happened. So were you privy to that decision, or did you have any inkling that it might happen? Did it surprise you?
I was in the previous administration, so this administration did not give me a heads up that it was happening, perhaps not surprisingly. I appreciate the point that the surprise or the erratic behavior of this administration has become a normal For me, I understood where they landed and the decision they made. I do think there are legitimate cybersecurity risks associated with advanced LLMs and where they're going. Um, I don't think this is the right way to do it. I don't think a Friday evening decision that surprises not just the world, but the markets and many companies and critical infrastructure providers, a rules-based regulatory system that has in advance a system of testing and of notifying partners and allies, but also companies, critical infrastructure providers, others who are key in the market. That would be a much wiser approach. It is hard to see the philosophical underpinnings go from we won't do anything to even like the parts of the Biden administration's work that they criticize as being over regulatory were largely transparency measures. They weren't really more than that. To go from that to kind of an overnight, we're going to stop everything, and then an executive order that actually goes much further. The landing point is hard to know where it will be. But for me, from a US perspective, I think a more regular rules-based, predictable approach, which we know how to do. We know how to do a regulatory system. It's just we've had some kind of gut reaction against the word regulation, as if that's, the worst thing in the world. And so to me, I think there is a rationale to bring a regulatory perspective to this. I think that matters for allies. I think that matters for the world. And I hope we get to that system soon, because I don't think this will be the last big security concern that we have to deal with.
Thank you. Gosia Nikowska, I'm not asking you to tell me exactly what happened when you found out, but what was the general climate in Brussels as a result of that?
I would say it was not a surprise for us either. Also, this is not the first time that this is happening. We had a similar situation with the chips, and it was under the administration, which is generally perceived friendlier to our cause. So I think that was up to a point expected, and what's our reaction was, I think also what is kind of typical for how the Commission and the European institutions act. So on the one hand, we tried to establish contacts directly with the company to get as much access as we reasonably can, and in parallel, as you might know, we have been working on this cybersecurity action plan specifically for AI, which addresses that concern, so that hopefully we are better prepared for the future. And I would like to echo what Mihalis said before. We have strong points, and this is our objective to build on them so that we are not out of the race. And I think we should not fall into this trap. Everything is bad and it's only gonna get worse. We definitely have our strengths on which we have to build and which we have to also use in this context. And I think Europe so far has been relatively, let's say, resisting to weaponizing our own strengths, but that day might come. It hasn't come yet, and I think for the good of all of us. But we do have strengths that can be used in this discussion, and we have already strategies in place to make sure that Europe stays in this AI race.
Yorgos, how did you react to finding out about the export control to clothes products?
I would say I was not surprised either, and I will echo some of the things that Ms. Nikowska and Assad and Mr. Bledsoe mentioned, is the fact that those sort of restrictions to access to other critical technologies have become a sort of norm. We have seen them occur before. Ms. Nikowska mentioned restrictions that took place on semiconductors towards the rest of the world. And during the Trump administration, the European Union has been threatened with limits of access towards semiconductors. And we have also seen other similar instances as well in Ukraine, where access to internet satellite services was also weaponized in order to gain concessions when the US administration was trying to strike a deal with Ukrainian officials. So in one way, we are seeing that access to critical technologies, and among others, access to AI models, is not to be taken for granted and can be weaponized. Now, I also want to draw the nuance that Assad also mentioned. This was a bit of a different case. This was, with Mythos, a case where cyber intrusion concerns may have been very valid, and some restrictions may have also been rightfully been put in place. However, first of all, this may be a warning shot of how the same sort of policy instrument, restrictions to AI models, can be repeated in the future for completely different purposes. So not for valid national security purposes, but in order to coerce others. And so I think what this tells us, and I want to again echo what Ms. Nikowska said, is that this is a call for Europeans to take more seriously, first of all, how they are able to build their own capabilities, so that in cases where access to critical technologies becomes scarce, there are alternatives out there in the market. And this is not necessarily about joining some sort of imagined race or sort of buying into the hyped narrative that the AI industry or others have sort of pushed, but it is actually about having alternatives in the market that also potentially embed European models of technological development and European values. And finally, also these sort of alternatives that we must also push to build will also provide us with bigger leverage, and that leverage can be used to deter coercion in the future, or as Assad was trying to paint, would allow Europe to negotiate access to those systems, would allow Europe to be able to co-determine limitations to those systems from a much more equal footing in the future.
All right. So the argument about joining the AI race starts with the recommendation that we should actually enable the massive private and public investments in compute and supply chains, data centers, energy, and so on, that will imply. Do we buy this argument? Should we actually go down that road? And can we realistically do it? Can we overcome the constraints that stem from, I don't know, high energy costs, licensing law, environmental regulation, labor law, and so on? So, yeah, can I ask Gosia Nikowska first, and then I will give the floor to the rest of you.
I think we have already done it. We have, and we are not putting all our eggs in the same basket. And I think this is the only strategy that can potentially turn out to be successful. So on the one hand, we are trying to remain at the frontier of the AI. We have launched this initiative, Frontier AI, where we are pulling together the resources to really stay at the front of the technology. I don't think we can abandon this. Even if there are some voices that we can build just smaller models, we can focus on industrial application, we should look at uptake. I think this is all valid, but we will simply even use the competences, the capacities, if we completely lose and stay behind in the frontier AI race. And therefore, we are not giving up, we are pushing that forward. At the same time, considering the point of compute, and as I hear from many experts, compute is basically the kind of keyword for any AI development. We have also pushed ahead. We have transformed.
We are 5%, are we? Europe accounts for like 5% of total global
today, but we are really scaling that up. And what you mentioned, together with private investment, the gigafactories and the call for gigafactories will come very soon. I heard from colleagues before summer, so we are mid-July, so we'll see what they mean as before summer. But nevertheless, soon we should have this call for public-private investment into this supercomputing power at increased level. But already today, for, let's say, not maybe those that want to build really the next top-notch LLM, but for those who develop the AI applications, the AI systems, they can already today use our network of best in the world, a network of public supercomputers that was optimized for AI use. The term AI factories, Greece very strong here, also a proponent, and with Pharos having already an AI factory operational is already out there. And we have not forgotten the demand side. and the uptake side. And here again, Europe is doing very, very well. The recent study done by no one else but Microsoft shows that we are actually exceeding, doing better than the States in terms of uptake, when the uptake of this technology is actually slowing down, while our European companies are doing better and better. And we have a number of initiatives that are supporting that. So while we do not see these results yet today, you could quote to me that out of the 80 LLMs in the best of the world, only 2 are Europeans, and I acknowledge that. But we are really having our kind of pieces of the puzzle put in the right place, and Europe is really ready to catch up. And in some areas, it's already doing very well. We also have, according to latest studies, around 25%, for example, of the market for AI agents. This is something that is currently in the phase of really high-speed development, bringing with itself its own risks. But nevertheless, I would say that we are doing pretty well, and we just really have to stay on course and not lose focus. That would be really very important.
Thank you. Michalis?
I think we have been rightfully so reactive at this point in time with all this development. We need compute. And we do need to develop our own cloud capabilities in general. No matter how close we are with our transatlantic partners, giving the US government the ability to pick into European data needs to go away. And the only way for that to go away is if we develop our own, in general, cloud capabilities. Now, when it comes to AI, I would like to diversify a little bit from what I heard. What we are doing right now is keep building upon the dominance of NVIDIA. And the dominance of NVIDIA is not as much its hardware, it's software. There are plenty of companies in the world building AI chips. None of them has been able to come even close to the utilization that NVIDIA gets. Actually, the second to NVIDIA is probably Google with their TPUs, their own homegrown chips, and everybody else is building. All the hyperscalers are building their own homegrown chips in there. The key to that is to be able to take advantage of those chips. And that's software. And that's something that we should pursue. NVIDIA has a big moat around them called CUDA, which is the library that allows AI workloads to run on their chips. And one of the things that the Chinese did is, for example, with DeepSeek, they were able to improve on pieces of that, on a library that was about communication of GPUs between each other. And my favorite, what I would like to always repeat when I speak about AI, is that the big bang in machine learning happened because one of Geoffrey Hinton's students, Alexisevsky, ported backpropagation, ported the math to run efficiently on NVIDIA hardware. NVIDIA didn't do that, but they had provided the libraries to do that, and that has essentially built them into the most valuable company in the world. And by the way, the only company that consistently makes real money out of AI at this point in time. Everybody else is investing money at this point in time, hoping that they will make them up in the future. The only company that makes real money out of AI, and this hasn't happened in previous industrial revolutions. There was never a single player that captured pretty much all the value, the real value. Everybody else is investing, and there is lots of funny money in the capital markets and the stock markets right now, which has put everybody in a very perilous position because, at some point in time, you have to get some profits out of all of those investments, and those profits don't seem to be coming very fast.
So are you suggesting that we may be observing a bubble that may burst?
Oh, yes, we are observing a bubble. The question is whether it will burst or it will deflate gradually. But the valuations that these companies are having are not justified by the profits that they are making. So it is a bubble. Will it be managed? We'll see. And if I knew when the bubble was going to burst, I would be making a lot of money. But people have been extremely bad in actually predicting. Nobody has ever predicted. And people who made it in one bubble bursting totally got wiped out when they tried to do it on another one. Bubble bursting is very hard to predict, especially when there is a lot of private money and hedge funds involved and financing that is not visible right now, not completely visible. Anyway, so the reason that I'm saying that is that one place that Europe should invest is actually building their own fundamental computing capabilities. And by that, I mean software. We are losing the ability to write high-performance computing software. NVIDIA's success is based exactly on that, and the fact that people haven't found a way to replicate their software advantage. Lots of people are building hardware that's much more advanced than NVIDIA's. There is no software to run on that and take advantage of that calculation. And if you look of that hardware, and if you look at the history of computing, we are becoming more and more wasteful when it comes to how much of the peak performance of our equipment we are able to extract using our software. And this is something that we really need to focus on. And that doesn't require huge investments and building lots of AI factories using NVIDIA supercomputers, which is what we are doing right now.
I was going to ask you precisely that. Are you suggesting that we should diversify away from data centers into, I don't know, keeping talent in Europe?
Exactly.
Exactly.
And having some data centers, especially available to our researchers, is very important. So I'm not saying that what we did is wrong, but we shouldn't continue down that path, building more and more. We should build smarter, and we should make sure that we develop and we keep in Europe the software talent that is required. And software talent is becoming, we are in a very strange time because, Gen AI builds a lot of code these days. Not great code, by the way, but it builds a lot of code. So just the fact that coding becomes accessible to more and more people shouldn't distract us from the fact that there are fewer and fewer and fewer people in the world that can build those critical pieces of software that are at the basis, at the foundation of what we see today. And Europe should really invest in those people.
I'm going to ask you later on shortly about the priorities. But let me now ask Yorgos to comment on, to answer my question, whether we should actually invest in data centers and what have you. So Yorgos.
My answer is yes and no. So yes, of course, compute is an important function of AI development and training, and it also supports the development of other digital technologies. And as Mr. Bledsa said, it can also serve some other socially valuable functions such as scientific research. So in some ways, it is important that Europe is able to access high quality compute. At the same time, however, again, as Mr. Bledsa, I think, highlighted very well, it is important that when making when setting specific objectives and making specific investments to increase compute, we are also able to understand well what the demand is and how that demand will increase in the next few years. To give you one specific example, about a month ago, the European Commission published the Cloud and AI Development Act, and there it sets an objective to triple the EU's existing data center capacity from what it is today. So the question that I have is, will that tripling of data center capacity actually meet the demand that will exist in the EU in the next 7 years? Or is it a sort of objective that we're setting based on hype metrics? And as Mr. Bledsoe said, we must be very careful to not do the latter, because we see in the US how a lot of those massive data center and compute build-outs are built on frail fundamentals, are built on financials that may not make a lot of sense. I know Mr. Ramzanali has done a lot of work on this, and I look forward to hearing what he said. But there's been many experts that have pointed out that massive investments on compute may not be completely recuperated. So we must be very careful to not make that mistake in Europe. So I think strict adherence to demand projections is an important point to make. And the other point that I also want to make is that we must also be very careful to see where those compute capabilities will come from. Because in the sort of structure of the market that we're seeing today, it is the US hyperscalers, companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, that dominate the provision of compute services, mainly through cloud. In the EU specifically, those three companies alone capture 70% of the European market. And so I think an equally important objective is to ensure that if we are making increased investments into compute capabilities, they do not further consolidate the dominant position that these firms enjoy in the European market, but that we seek to support alternatives, whether those are European-made alternatives or alternatives coming from other countries that promote interoperable ways of doing cloud, or that promote open standards. And of course, I think there is a huge point to be made about public compute as well. So compute infrastructure that is provided by the public sector. And I think the AI gigafactories are a great initiative that meets this objective.
Thank you, Yorgos. I thought you are based in Washington, D.C. So what is a view of American observers? What is a view of Europe on the part of American observers? Do people think that Europe is out of the race? Can it do what it takes? Should it? What do you think of that?
First, I think Washington, D.C. has a lot of insular thinking. There's a lot of what are we doing? How do we move faster? That doesn't always compare to others, for better or for worse. To the degree that the race mentality is discussed, and to those who buy into the need to push on that narrative, it really is a US-China race for most people here. If I was in the EU, if I was in the shoes of policymakers in the EU, and far be it from me to give recommendations, the things that I think are important are to set the right goals. And that from where I sit, many different goals have been discussed today, right? There's a cybersecurity, national security, vulnerability question. There's a economic benefits question. There's an infrastructure stability question. The goals of trying to have relevance in a technological narrative of a race, to me, is the least useful among those, right? There are I get the notion of wanting economic gains. I get the notion of jobs. I get the notion of resilience as a society, national security concerns, infrastructural dependence on other countries. I get all of that. Being part of some, race where I think most people here and most people in China view it as a two-part race. But what is that race, and what are we as Americans getting out of it? I question a lot. To George's point, I think there are a lot of fundamental financial questions of whether the investments we're making will pan out. But put all of that aside for a second, I get the idea that that a power like the EU, where you have a lot of economic power, you have a lot of relevance in the world markets, to develop something like public compute or alternatives, I think makes sense. One caution I'd have is there's a growing crop of neo cloud providers that appear to be competitive with the cloud providers or hyperscalers, but from my vantage point, they're all just effectively fronts for NVIDIA. Almost all of them are funded by NVIDIA as the largest investor, sometimes creditor. NVIDIA has done guaranteed cloud capacity buys with some of them. And so to me, I really appreciate the point of not cementing the dominance of the existing dominant powers. I appreciated all the points on NVIDIA. One slight disagreement I would have is I don't think their entire moat is CUDA. I think that's part of it. I think they've actually become quite a financial engineer. I think they are using their monopoly position and the monopoly rents they've been able to extract to then invest in customers who create artificial revenues. And that structure is actually something that, from a markets perspective in the US, just thinking domestically, I'm really worried about. Because that then messes with prices, it messes with demand, it messes with how we think about stability at different parts of different layers of the AI stack. So a lot of us are watching that here in the US and in civil society groups and in others where that dependence alone becomes troubling for us. So I can imagine that if I was in the EU, I would feel maybe triply as strong about that concern.
Thank you. All right. Of all the things that I have been reading about how the AI situation might evolve in the near future, one of the most chilling of all possible scenarios to me is that, there are many, including the end of mankind as we know it, but I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to a geopolitical scenario in which the current or a future US administration or the Chinese government might play one EU member state against the other. The Netherlands against Germany or Italy against France, whatever, which would cause the fracture in the short term and perhaps in the medium term, the eventual end of the EU, conceivably. So an effective response to that might be not just ever closer union among the EU member states, but perhaps what Mark Carney termed middle powers alliance. Because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. An alliance that might bring in Norway with vast energy deposits, power, the UK with all the talent available in London, Canada, of course, but even Japan and South Korea. What do you think of that? Do you think that makes sense? And if it is something that ought to happen, what needs to be done in order to make it happen? So I will start with Gosia this time.
Well, first of all, I would argue that the EU is not a middle power. We are a big power. Comparing to market size, comparing the number of people, we're definitely not a middle one. So I think we have a strong voice, and starting from the Brussels effect to our convening power, we definitely, I think, have a lot of strength to work together with what we used to call like-minded partners, and now I think we just call partners around the world. And there are many who are now even more interested in the current geopolitical climate to reach out to us. And a lot of this is happening. We have digital partnership with Korea, with Japan, with Canada. I was at a very interesting event a few weeks ago, and they have their action plan for AI, which is actually very, very similar. It was a bit of a boring panel because me and the Canadian representative were basically saying the same things in terms of what we are doing. So I think a lot is really going on there. And on the kind of putting member states against each other, that happens all the time. If we look at the export control for the semiconductors, that's exactly what happened. There were tier 1 countries and tier 2 countries. But so far, the EU has held strong, and I think this actually shows us that we are really much stronger together. So well, of course, there is a slight concern at the back of my mind about this. I don't think this is really a fear. Of course, sometimes member states put their interest ahead of the union one, and they kind of push forward. But we have 4 hours. This is discussed. This is part of regular discussions. This is not something that we have to, call an ad hoc meeting of heads of state to deal with one country going ahead. There are regular weekly meetings of the ambassadors where these kind of issues are raised. And I think so far we have come out of it victorious in the sense that these things were pulled together. And of course, there are always some interests that some member states feel stronger about and have more at stake. If you are a small member state somewhere in the middle of Europe and you feel very secure vis-a-vis where you are placed, where your neighbors are placed, and where the, let's say, big world is there, you might have different interests than you are one of the key economies and you are pushing forward your industry policy. But nevertheless, I think on that we are pretty strong. We have lots of experience in finding compromise. It takes us time, which sometimes is kind of put as our weakness, but once we get it, we get there. So I think we can do it. We just cannot lose focus. I think this AI race, and maybe race is actually the wrong word. We put ourselves like, okay, somebody wins, somebody lose. We can actually all win in this, and we definitely cannot let the world go completely ahead of us. But I think we are in no danger of that.
Thank you. Michalis?
Look, letting Silicon Valley play God, us trying to do some more real things is fine. Long-term strategy. I don't think but we do have to start acting more like one. There is still regional competitions. We have to divide the workload, figure out who can do it best and assign it there. We have to start acting as one. That's the most important thing. We are not right now. You see, we will build a lot of AI factories because every country or every region needs one. Well, if you're going to compete with a hyperscaler, you should really have one. Because it's very hard to put these multiple AI factories to work as one. And we are not there yet. And that's a much more general issue. On the other hand, it has some, very good qualities. Europe is never erratic in its responses, political responses, because it takes a lot of deliberation to come to them. And usually you can predict the outcome, even when people are having a hard time coming to the right conclusion. At the end, they do. Maybe delayed, but they do. So at least we are not erratic. Also, I'm not willing to write off the West as a single entity. Okay, we should be a little bit more strategic and having a longer view at the end of the day.
That raises the possibility that a future US administration will reverse course on AI.
Look,
and many other things.
Everybody who has an engineering degree knows that when you get a very large sudden input in a system, you get a lot of ringing in the output. So the US will take a long time to stabilize. But we shouldn't write off the US or that the US won't find the right path at the end of the day. There are plenty of dystopic scenarios that we have to prepare for, including the radical erosion of democracy. If you see what happens, for example, right now with SpaceX, plenty of lunatics that went and gave Elon Musk a blank check. If you look what happened there, essentially Elon Musk and his offspring can control all that capital without any form of traditional corporate governance. The US, though historically, has shown that it has the right reflexes. Takes them a long time. We saw that happening again 100 years ago with the oil barons and Standard Oil and Rockefeller. And I think that eventually the US will find its way in actually controlling those people. If they don't, then we are a bit problematic. But we have already seen signs of this happening. I mean, if you also saw what Alex Karp, that's the boss of Palantir, saying recently, but we have to prepare ourselves for every eventuality. That will be responsible to just rely on our wishful thinking and in our faith that humans at the end of the day are more good than bad. We need to prepare for that.
You explain to our listeners who are not familiar with the boss of Palantir what he said and why it's relevant?
Well, he initially, his initial positions and what he claimed for many, many years now was that, look, we live in a dangerous world and forget those pesky ethics issues, and it's all about helping our, war-fighting capabilities, and we are all about helping the government, etc., etc. He was saying that before Trump. He aligned himself perfectly with Trump, and then after he started getting a lot of backfire, despite the fact that now the situation is for him, looking forward, he says that this probably doesn't end very well. We don't know for whom yet, and he reversed course and he started saying, he started turning against the rest of the oligarchs in Silicon Valley, essentially, and Elon Musk and the people who say don't pay any attention to regulation and it's all about an unstable world, and the rhetoric that you hear emanating from the White House, and sometimes even his main investor, Peter Thiel. That was the most interesting thing. I mean, Peter Thiel is one of the people who are driving this mentality that we should do whatever we have to in order to make our fortunes bigger and bigger and, reach general AI and control general AI. It's a pretty interesting thing to follow what happens in the US, and what we are preparing for in Europe is the eventuality that this won't turn out very well, and that's what Mark Carney is also promoting, because there is a very great possibility that there will be a lot of institutional erosion, that the situation will be reversible.
Yeah. I ask you about Palantir because, of course, Palantir has won multi-million contracts in the UK. It runs the medical records in the National Health Service, and so on and so forth. All right.
And they say we are accountable to nobody because we are the good guys. Mm-hmm. We are helping, governments.
Yeah.
By the way, that was the argument of the NSO group that was selling Pegasus too. But anyway, now they are reversing that argument a little bit. They are putting a little bit more nuance into it. Maybe we are not great guys just by helping governments. We have to put some other ingredients in there so that we can become the good guys.
All right. Let me ask Assad to comment on not just on the future of middle power alliance cooperation, but also on the possibility that a future US administration might restore the West as an alliance in which different countries across the Atlantic work more closely together in a less adversarial context on AI and other things. So you worked with previous US administrations, perhaps you will work with future US administrations. I certainly hope so.
I do too. The paradigm I think of is not a return to previous structures or procedures or forms or even institutions, but it's a reasserting of the values that undergirded those. It's hard to see any administration kind of reversing the clock and saying the system that we had worked well, it was perfect, let's just go back to it. I don't think anyone believes that. I don't think we believe that. I don't think you all believe that. I think everyone saw the issues with prior systems and the equilibrium always felt just barely holding on at times. And so I think that the real work is to identify, to articulate, and to fight for the values that undergirded those. And I think that doesn't just mean cooperation among allies. That doesn't just mean peace, although those are unbelievably important. But I think a lot about institutions for truth seeking. We used to think of governments and of universities as being truthful. At the end of the day, you could believe something that came out being factual, asserted in a set of thoughtfulness. And that is the basis of the research architecture that made AI an American success. ChatGPT is the proof that AI can be an overnight success after 60 years of public investment in the US. Right. So that's the kind of thing that I think about. We've compared in this discussion the Industrial Revolution and many other eras where we have huge technological shifts that move the economy in massive ways. Those we often attribute to, let's say, railroads or to electrification, but many other massive sectors of the economy were built on top of those. I think about in the early 1900s, you see electrification, but you also see the radio, you also see aviation take off. All of those kinds of things were because both markets and public investments were experimenting. The telegraph was actually the first demonstration of it in the US, was an appropriation from Congress. It was public money. And so I think a lot about the way we got to success in those technologies and in AI. I worry a lot about the US not doubling down on those mechanisms of public investment in research, labor fluidity, welcoming the smartest people in the world to our markets, having a rule of law that keeps markets honest, having regulation like antitrust that allows for competition. All of those things that have been atrophying. I don't think the answer is to revert back to the exact structure of making sure that the grants, the way we had them through NSF, must be exactly the same. It's can we figure out what the values were and go back to that world? So that's kind of how I think about the broader work ahead. But I also think that my hope is that the work of experimenting, of developing research, of being thoughtful about what else happens, not just the narrow set of LLM technologies and not just transformer-based AI architecture, but what else could there be? That's where I think if I was in your shoes, if I was in the government still, I'd be doing a lot of work thinking about what's around the corner, right? We see the market doing this race towards LLMs. I think there's a lot of financial waste, but that's happening, right? That's what's happening in the world. I don't know what the next wave is. No one does. And so we should be thoughtful about more directed R&D towards those kinds of things.
All right. Yorgos?
Yeah, so going back to the question about middle powers, I think that it is not only possible that we strengthen their collaboration, but it is honestly an imperative for the European Union. And that is independently of whether in a few years we see any significant shifts happening in the United States. And so that is an imperative for a few reasons. First of all, because middle powers, and I agree with Ms. Nikowska that Europe is a superpower, but when talking about other middle powers, they all hold important positions in the global AI value chains. And when we're talking about South Korea and Japan. They hold strong positions in the semiconductor value chain. When we talk about the United Kingdom, there is strong financial firepower there that can also support developments. And so greater collaboration between those different parts, those different strengths that each one of these partners brings can help elevate the sum of the partners. And there is also a lot of overlaps sometimes in what these countries pursue. So back to the question of compute, we also see countries such as the United Kingdom trying to pursue an increase in compute through AI growth zones. And something that a middle power collaboration could offer us is actually, we could see we may not need as much compute as we thought we did, because through collaboration, we can actually compensate. We can actually access middle power partner infrastructure and vice versa. And then finally, going also to what Mr. Bletsas and Mr. Ramzanali has said, the possibility of alternative approaches to AI development should also be taken seriously. And that is something that middle powers can also contribute to. So pulling together R&D, public funding in order to pursue strategic bets in what those other alternative approaches could look like is something that can be done on a collective level. And the EU is doing a lot of it on a bilateral level through the digital partnerships that Ms. Nikowska talked about. But I think also a sort of like minilateral setting where these partners get together and are able to make progress on these fronts is very important. And also to comment on the possibility of a US administration or another country pitting EU member states against each other. As Ms. Niskowska said, that's a real possibility. We've seen that happening in the past, but we must also, I think, take steps to prevent it from happening in the future, especially in ways that may be very harmful to the European Union and to our integration project. And I think the antidote to that is, as Mr. Matsaganis, you said, greater integration. And it's not only an antidote to preventing member states from being pitted against each other, it's also a prerequisite for the European Union to be able to make progress in its AI capabilities, in its AI development. So we know, for example, that one of the probably major reasons Europe lacks in its ability to produce AI innovators and AI startups has been that the European digital market is essentially fragmented. We're not really talking about one single market. We're talking about 27 different European markets. And if you're a startup creating your operations in Greece, let's say, it becomes very hard that you scale across the entire continent. So by starting to tackle those barriers when it comes to harmonization, when it comes to capital markets, we will be able, first of all, to further support AI innovators that have brilliant ideas and they want to develop products that are actually valuable to citizens and other businesses. But we are also, in a way, making member states have a stake in each other, have a stake in the integration project, and preventing as much as we can a scenario where they're pitted against each other.
All right, thank you. Okay, thinking about strategic autonomy, which is the goal for the EU. So the whole point of that is to make oneself indispensable. So in your opinion, what are Europe's unique strengths that we owe to be exploiting? And, for those of you who are based in Greece, or even for all of you, if you want to hazard a guess, what are Greece's unique strengths? Can I start from Michalis? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yep. So let's remember that we are ASML is the leader in chip manufacturing technology. We have plenty of successes with advanced system development. For example, the Starlink terminal, which is where most of the intelligence was built by ST, the original Starlink terminal. So we do have a lot of indigenous capability that we should build upon. At the end of the day, though, we have to remember that, and I will take a little exception there from what I agreed with everything that Assad said, but we have to remember that the current boom in machine learning and that led to transformers and LLMs happened despite the support. There was no money in there. AI was going through a big winter, and it was just through the insistence of some people to keep working on something. And the overall support for this kind of research that exists in the US, and it's done a lot more efficiently than it is done in Europe, by the way, the central support, essentially led us where we are today. This was not the private sector going there. It was people in universities essentially following their passion, and their universities having the resources to support their passion. So as far as I'm concerned, we should focus on establishing, it's important to establish very solid software development capabilities. We don't have those. There are very, very few people in the world that know how to do that low-level, high-performance computing libraries that everything is built upon, and they are mostly in the US these days, and increasingly in China. Not even India. So those capabilities are important. And right now, the existing AI technology is leading us to atrophy in the specific area. Without solid low-level software capabilities, we cannot build anything. Software is at the basis of everything that we do these days, and this is becoming more and more important. Now, being able to manufacture 2-nanometer chips, not as important. It's important to make money, but strategically, we can deal with 5 nanometers. But let's get there. We are not there. No, nobody in Europe can build those things. There is the China factor there. There is their stated intent to take over Taiwan one way or another. That will create a huge disruption in the supply chain. You see what happens now with computing equipment. Just because everybody is manufacturing the memories that are needed for AI, so everything else has gone through the roof, 200% up prices in servers. Lots of European projects that we have to rebudget now because we cannot buy the equipment with the original budgets. So we do need to diversify our sources. How we built the supply chains in the past few years doesn't lead to security or balance, and geopolitics become much more of a factor than they should. So having more balanced supply chains is important. Building certain things. We are not building any small electronics in Europe in any substantial. Yeah, it will be nice if geopolitics go away and the possibility of war went away completely. We would be happy outsourcing everything to Asia. Well, we saw where that led us. So obviously a little bit of protectionism there, because that's the only real solution. Probably wouldn't be bad, in order to make sure that certain capabilities remain in Europe. Certain manufacturing capabilities have to remain in Europe. We saw, and also not everybody plays fair. We saw what happened with solar panels in China. We were ahead in Europe. We played by the rules. What did that do for us? Not that great. So we should be transparent. But this whole thing about free trade everywhere doesn't work very well. And we have to come into conclusions. Free trade requires a lot more than just the price of labor as a factor, or the price of goods. There are externalities in there that should be taken into consideration.
Okay. So, Asad, what is a view from the US? What are Europe's unique strengths that may be complementary to what US hyperscalers or others wish to do, or perhaps viewed as potential threats in a dominance framework? What do you think?
I think so far be it for me to tell how people in Europe should think about Europe. My perspective of the US debates in not just this administration, but also in much of the last, but not as much, but much of the last administration as well, is that they've centered bottom up from the infrastructure upward, where we had debates about the CHIPS Act. Now, that wasn't an AI debate, but it's related. We had debates about cloud and about data centers that are now heating up in ways. And if you look at a lot of the foreign policy documents that relate to AI in the Trump administration, starting with their initial national plan, starting with some of the executive orders and others, it's in fact, they say they want to export the stack, right? They want the American stack, the technological stack, to be the basis of the world. I think of two gaps in that logic from a public policy perspective that I think matter for Americans, but I think also matters for Europe. One is that stack is all enablement. At the end of the day, what I want as a citizen of the US, but also of the world, is technology that improves people's lives, that adds to the values we care about, that makes the world more stable and peaceful, that makes better health outcomes for people. That's the things we want. It is not data centers or better ASML machinery, right? It's specifically the innovation that actually improves lives. That from infrastructure to that, there's a large set of assumptions that are being made, including that LLMs will be the basis for curing cancer or for other things, where I actually think I'm much more interested in biodesign tools. I'm much more interested in some of the weather models that actually Europe's doing a lot of interesting research in. So to me, the application layer of how this technology actually gets applied in the world is interesting. Now, we started with some of the financials of where's the money flowing. NVIDIA is making a lot of money, but not the big AI model companies. Long term, I don't know where value will accrue. I think infrastructure will continue to capture a large share of it, but I think it'll also be at the application layer, depending on how those play out, depending on what markets emerge there. And that's the most interesting question to me, is what new markets develop in the application layer. And that's where, because you're not grounded in the same, we have to own the whole infrastructure as an assumption set, although I do think some of the rhetoric in Europe is going that way. You can actually do something interesting at the application layer that is useful not just for your member countries or not just at the EU level, but for the world. The second thing I think about is every part of the tech stack is our ways of talking about it are changing quickly. Even the way we measure data centers is now in gigawatts. It is a funny thing to measure compute through energy, right? Like that is a mismatch of units in a weird way. And I get the reason, because there are bottlenecks and other things. Part of this is we don't have good ways of talking about everything that's happening at every layer of the stack. This is benchmarks, this is standards, this is protocols. All of that developed in the internet world. And the core technologies that enable things like web browsers that, yes, American companies made a lot of progress in, But like the core technology and the ideas come from CERN, come from other places. So this is where I don't think the story of how AI itself will play out has been written. Um, it's hard for me to see a race in which the EU all of a sudden becomes a major cloud provider and is, tomorrow taking 30% of revenues globally or anything like that. Is there a benefit to having some kind of publicly owned or some kind of competitive cloud? Sure. But the more interesting thing to me is how do we actually take those innovations that translate to people's lives? And that's the work that I want us to do in the US. But if I was in the EU, that's what I'd be excited about too.
Thank you. I'll ask Yorgos first and then Gosia. So what are Europe's unique strengths or even conceivably Greece's unique strengths here?
So if I had to name one thing, it would absolutely be talent. So Europe is home to some of the top universities in the world and has been able to produce bright minds. And I would even argue that Greece has been a big part of that. So first of all, when we're looking at the European level, I think even last year, the Europe ranked second in the world in terms of total AI publications produced, just right behind China. And even if we see at other metrics, we see that sort of prevalence of European talent. And especially for Greece, I think it's also important to say that Greek universities have been able to produce some fantastic engineers. One piece of evidence that stands out to me is that at NeurIPS, the world's most prominent AI conference, I believe 11% of the top papers had at least one Greek co-author, which I think speaks of the potential of Greek, but also European talent. So to me, first of all, that is an indication that often Europe's challenges come from its inability to scale. So the idea, the talent is there in place, but there seem to be barriers to scale that include, as I talked about before, the fragmentation of its markets and the lack of access to capital. Now, I also want to agree with Asad a lot with the fact that Europe can also benefit massively from the application layer of the technology. And, it's very easy to find out by just thinking what are Europe's strengths in general. So taking a little step back away from the AI discussion, where is Europe's economic strength lie to? And very often we see industries such as pharmaceuticals, automotives, manufacturing. And so I think what is very useful to start thinking about, and I know the European Commission has done a lot of work on that with the Apply AI strategy, but it is actually how we actually make use of AI innovation in order to strengthen this industry. So in order to strengthen pharmaceutical research, in order to strengthen Europe's automotive competitive edge.
Gosia, what are Europe's unique strengths that we should be exploiting?
Well, Yorgos has taken away everything that I wanted to say, but it is indeed, I strongly believe that we have good talent in Europe and we are working on it to support further. So the software layer, the expertise in technology, we are working on it to keep it in Europe and to strengthen it in Europe further. We have also a very vibrant startup ecosystem. And I think also Greece is one of the hubs that are being kind of now really picking up with lots of companies creating AI systems that can then be deployed in our critical for the economy sectors. And this is where I think our strengths lie and where we can really work out more and support our companies in really developing faster and further. And my personal plea here to companies, let's really go ahead and do it. Because here in Europe, we also tend to complain a lot. I think this is our kind of characteristic. We always see bad things happening. We prefer to avoid risks. And then we go to the US where the culture is completely different. And suddenly it turns out that we can take risks and make bold decisions. And I think more and more of that should really happen in Europe. Let's not focus that much on whether the regulation allows this little thing or forbids this little thing. Let's just try and go ahead and do it. And I think we can really move ahead much, much faster.
If I am to be the devil's advocate, what happens if all this talent, produces great ideas that are commercialized, and then they're all taken over by US companies, or the people concerned relocate to Silicon Valley. What can we do to stop it? I mean, it's not just a question of raising salaries for, or reducing taxation. It's also a question about capital markets, EU savings being in bank accounts rather than in a place where they can be mobilized to support startups and so on and so forth. So how would you tackle that?
Well, capital is definitely one of the things that our companies are missing. We bring them up to the certain level, and they simply hit a wall and cannot find the capital to grow further. So this is something that we are actually working on to try to make all these savings that are safely sitting on our bank accounts to make better use for the European economy. It will not happen tomorrow. That these are complicated discussions with lots of interest, and our overall risk-averse culture also enters into play. I mean, we don't want to lose our pensions next day just because they invested into the AI bubble. So definitely, this is going to take time. But I think we are moving in the right direction, and there are parallel tracks, like, for example, the Scale-Up Fund that is being created together with the private sector money. So I think we are definitely on the right track. I also would like that it goes a little bit further, because we see great companies leaving. But on the good side, and though it's anecdotal evidence for the moment, we do also have companies relocating back to Europe. And I think the current US administration is helping us a lot in that sense to encourage some returns, both on the side of companies and on the side of our great scientists. We have also this Marie Curie Skłodowska action, whose name escaped me, but it's something like Welcome to Europe or something like that, where really we encourage scientists who are looking for other opportunities where to continue their research to also look at Europe more favorably. And I know that there were some successful transfers already happening. So, I think we are on the right track. Let's not think that nothing is happening and everybody is waiting for the results of this discussion to start working. But it's true that we also have to push and make sure that we don't lose focus and really kind of work on these different tracks, but also not disperse our attention to the gazillion other things that are happening.
Yeah. So, okay, we have another quarter of an hour, a bit less. So let me ask you my last question. So if a country like Greece, say, had loads of money, which it doesn't, of course, say 10 billion, 12 billion, 4-5% of Greece's GDP to spend on AI. And so if you were in charge of that budget, how would you spend it? I think I will ask Michalis first, who is closest to that situation.
I would, first of all, I would make sure that I have solid data storage and curation facilities. There is no AI without data. Second, I would, make sure that I have some basic compute capabilities in place, including a plan on how to upgrade them, because usually, you buy something expensive and then you cannot maintain it. I wouldn't invest it in NVIDIA stock. I would invest it a little bit more, conservatively, so that it has some returns. I would create a fund. I would fund research, basic research, and I would create some kind of fund at the image of the MIT's The Engine, in the sense something that has a lot more longer term horizon than the existing VC funds to invest on longer term bets. And most of it would go to education and research. But I would look at the whole pipeline. We are very good, as Yorgos mentioned, we are very good on producing papers. We are very bad in turning those papers to actual products and solutions that improve people's lives. So data first, creating those libraries and taking advantage, publishing those public sector data in ways that are useful and can create the conditions for useful applications, a little bit in infrastructure, in a kind of a centralized way, similar to what we are doing right now with Pharos and the AI factories, common facilities, not every little university their own one. But mostly I would invest in longer bets in commercialization if what comes out of the research, I would say.
How about you, Asad? Say if we persuaded you to leave Vanderbilt and head, this authority, not take Michalis's job, some other job in which you had this money at your disposal, where would you start?
First, I should say, in case my bosses are watching, I'm very happy with my job. What was the amount of money you said again? Was it 12 billion?
Yes, something like that, which is not huge by your standards.
No, but it's like double to triple the size of like DARPA's budget, right? It's actually like a significant pot of money. I think the rough categories that Michalis said, I think I'd agree with, of some to basics, some to education, some to infrastructure. I would take a big chunk of it, maybe half, and put it towards a sector or two where Greece has either a need or has a specific expertise set where you have experience among university professors or people in industry that you could say, we want to invest in the types of startups that come out of this. I might not limit it to just AI. I might say innovations that include building on top of current AI paradigms that change AI paradigms or look further out. And I would, in my own head, I'd be on kind of a 10-year horizon because I think some of those big bets are going to be, they're not going to be overnight startup successes that, tomorrow raise a bunch of money. George, I think your paper pointed to agriculture and to climate, to a few specific categories. I think those are good starts. I don't know the Greece situation. I don't know the Greek economy well enough to say what the right sectors are. But the two things I would be considering that actually cut in the opposite direction are, one, where do strengths exist today? And two, where are other people not playing? Right? Because there is an element of like, if there's already, I mentioned earlier drug discovery. That's an area where pharmaceutical companies have now really invested a lot of money and time and effort. And I think there's still a bunch of stuff to do at the public governance level, but that's not something where I would say, please go do more of this for, a couple $1 billion. So that's where I would spend the time and a good chunk of money, but doubling down on definitely a little bit of research base, a little bit of data, infrastructure base, some degree of compute, although it might make more sense at the EU level to think about that strategically.
Thank you. Yorgos, what about yourself? You have already made some specific recommendations in your policy brief that I urge all of you, all our listeners to read. But what would you say to this?
Well, let me start with something a bit different and I will come to the paper. But I think something that has not been mentioned is also the need to invest in government capacity. So I think many of the challenges that we face is that a lot of European governments, a lot of global governments do not have the in-house capacity to be able to understand and process a lot of the challenges that AI poses. And to that end, we need a lot of technical talent as well to join the government and the public service. And of course, that is a very costly endeavor because the market is so competitive at the moment. But I do think it is a very worth endeavor to be able to sort of invest some resources there. And I think one of the sort of success stories in this regard has been the United Kingdom, where they started the AI Security Institute. They were able, as far as I know, be able to tweak the rules a little bit about the salaries that public servants receive and sort of make more competitive offers to engineers in the UK. And to that end, they've been able to build a very impressive team that, you know, as Mr. Beletzas was saying, has become the point of reference often to evaluating claims that AI labs are making or evaluating the risk capabilities of novel AI systems. But besides this, I think I agree with a lot of the points that were mentioned. Basic R&D research is something important, and as I think we've mentioned a lot of times in this discussion, being able to take bets into alternative approaches. If I were to be a bit more concrete about that, it seems to me that especially the approaches towards spatial and physical intelligence, so also starting to bridge the capability of AI systems to better understand our physical full 3D world is something that is currently missing from large language models, and also something that is likely to bring a lot of economic but also social value from the AI market. And then finally, as it was mentioned as well, focus those investments in the application layer in delivering concrete results to citizens, consumers, and other businesses. In the case of Greece, two specific use cases that I mentioned is agriculture and mitigating climate change, which are two areas that are of importance in Greece. So in terms of climate change, we have seen the problems and the challenges that we face with wildfires, and more increasingly with drought management as well. And AI systems can play roles in helping us manage these crises better. And say in agriculture, the challenges that Greece's farmers are facing in some ways could be helped. AI systems could contribute to help their productivity and help them manage their crops more efficiently.
Thank you. Gottfried? Yeah, you don't. Perhaps you might be a bit reticent giving advice to a specific member state like Greece, but what would you encourage a small EU member state to prioritize?
Well, my team actually in the AI office, we are in charge of the uptake. So while we look at all the other things, our main kind of point of action is how to make sure that our companies use AI more and more, and for their core processes. It's not so that, you know, we use all these chatbots to help us write better emails, but really in a manufacturing company, it is used for the core process of producing something. So I would look at with that more at the demand side, and I would put in place like a voucher scheme for companies, for public sector to purchase AI solution made in Europe, or maybe, assuming there were no rules, maybe even made in Greece. I think that could really spearhead the efforts also on the side of companies to give more solutions, put on the market more solutions that would be then taken up by the companies, by the citizens, by the public sector. And the second element, which we mentioned talent, but I think we also should talk about literacy. It is not only about the people using AI for their work or, you know, developing AI that have to be aware of what it brings, but overall as citizens. And we mentioned, though only briefly, the impact on democratic processes. I think we see it more and more. And really literacy, that should be something that we start on very early on with our kids. And throughout, let's say, the lifespan of humans, because the developments are so fast and so much needs to be done. In theory, we understand we still click the things that we probably should not. So I think I would really invest in these two aspects. Of course, all the other aspects mentioned were also relevant, but I think if you only had these 12 billion, then you have to make some priorities.
All right. Is there anything else that we should be discussing and we haven't so far mentioned? Gothia, do you think?
Well, I think we were all encompassing in this discussion. So, and I also mentioned literacy at the end. So probably I would not have anything more to add.
Thank you. Yorgos?
Likewise, I think, as Mr. Nikowska said, I think it's time for Europe really to step up and all the ingredients are in place. And it's time that we go out there and build. But of course, as with the qualifying mentioned, that we should not just build following a blind hype or a blind race, but actually build products and services that deliver value to the public, that deliver value to citizens, and at the end of the day, they make their lives better.
All right. Assad, a soundbite.
I think the sound bites have been good so far. I just agree with the things that have been said, that I'd start with objectives and think about the utility of building innovations that change lives, not just more and more parameters or flops or some metric that doesn't actually equate to democratic development or a quality of life development.
Michalis, last word.
It's about focusing our education systems in what makes us humans. And that will make us more productive with the machines overall and will produce those outcomes that we are all wishing for.
Okay. This is a huge issue that we will leave to perhaps another roundtable discussion. So let me bring this one to a close. I hope you will all agree, our listeners, that we have had a very interesting and thoughtful roundtable discussion today. I have personally learned an awful lot, and I'm sure those in the audience did too. So many thanks to our panelists, Gosia, Michalis, Assad, and Yorgos, and many thanks to you all for being with us today. Have a great evening. All those of you in the US, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.